Hello and welcome. In today's Lightroom tutorial I want to talk about the graduated filter and show you how it can really be helpful to complexify your picture, how to add different colors, exposure, and overall make your picture a lot more interesting, dynamic, and a lot better. I've prepared 3 photos that I want to show you the graduated filters on, why I use them, what kind of different ways I use them, and of course the differences from before and after and how it really helps your picture. Anyways, here I want to show you the first thing that I think is probably the most impactful way to use a graduated filter, and that is to fix the exposure of a sky. And oftentimes if you will edit your landscapes, by the way, this picture and all of my pictures are fully edited with all of the adjustments already done, except for the graduated filters. So oftentimes when you will edit the landscape, you will just end up with a sky kind of looking like this, and of course it's way too bright. And a really easy way to fix that with is just by grabbing a graduated filter, dragging it over the sky, and going down into the minus exposure. And you know, it's a very drastic difference, but I think it's pretty basic, and probably most of you already use this technique. So another thing that you can do with the graduated filter over the sky is adjust the contrast and clarity. And there are pretty much 2 ways that I like to do, or that I like to go for. And the one is to go plus contrast, plus clarity, both about maybe plus 40, plus 50, somewhere around that range. And that really works for very dramatic, very cloudy pictures just as this one, because it really pronounces all of this texture even more. It adds contrast and it makes your picture or your sky look a lot more dramatic, which I think works really well in very stormy pictures just as this one, for example. But if you have a very soft, maybe a winter picture or a sunset picture, it can actually work to go into the minus clarity and in the minus contrast, just, you know, to work for the overall mood, to take away some structure on the actual clouds. And you know, it's very dependent, but generally I go either into the minus or into the plus with the contrast and clarity. I very rarely leave them at 0. So let's go here into the plus contrast and the plus clarity, because this is of course a very stormy picture and I really like the way it looks here. Then another thing that you can get, especially by bringing down the exposure quite far, is kind of get some color in the sky that you may not necessarily want. And I mean, there are a ton of ways to try and fix that. You could go into the temperature and maybe try to add some of the other color that you want to equivalate that out with, if that makes any sense. But the easiest way to do that is really just to go into the saturation and bring that one a bit down. And I mean, you don't want to go too far, otherwise you're gonna end up with a black and white sky. But for example here, it's just a bit too bluish, a bit too much saturation in the sky. So I'm just gonna go down maybe 15, somewhere around that. And since this sky doesn't have too much interesting color in it anyways, it's really a great thing to work with. So let's just show you before that one graduated filter, and here is after. So you see it's already a very big difference, but I think that's, you know, pretty much what most people use these graduated filters for, just to fix the exposure in the sky. But let's grab another graduated filters, and this is another very valuable, very important thing that you can do to make your picture look as best as possible, and that is to close out your photo. And the way you do that is just by dragging a graduated filter over the very bottom. Make sure you don't have too soft of an edge, just make it look something like this, and then go into the minus exposure. And that is pretty much an additional layer of vignetting, but a very selective one, and it really helps to give differentiation from different shades of darkness, but also to keep your eye contained within the picture. And And you can also do that with the sky, although you kind of have to be a bit more careful there because it oftentimes shows much more easily, so just don't go as far there as you've gone with the foreground. But as you see here, it really helps to contain your eye within the photo, and as I delete these two filters right here, it just becomes a lot more monotone and less interesting compared to after. And I mean, this is a thing that doesn't work in every single picture, but it works in quite a lot of them, and I definitely think it is worth to at least try out and play around with. Then the third way I really love to use the graduated filters for is to go over a part of the sky or over the picture where the light is kind of more bright, where the light is coming from, and just drag a filter over pretty much the entire half of that photo. The only thing that you want to look for is that you have a very soft edge, and then go a little bit into the plus exposure, and then grab another one over pretty much parallel to the previous one, also with a very soft edge, and this time go a little bit into the minus exposure. And the reason you want to do that is so you really have a nice graduation from one side of the picture being relatively bright, kind of going into the medium, neutral areas, going into the very dark areas, and that way you really can complexify your whole lighting scheme, and it's a very subtle thing that you will not even notice if you have done it right, but it definitely does make a difference. For example, if I show you here, before that adjustment, it just looks a lot more monotone if you see the before and after, and I think it's really a great thing that can bring your picture to the next level. So I think that is pretty much all I'm gonna do for this photo in terms of the graduated filters. It's really a very, significant difference from before any graduated filters, and here is after, especially of course the exposure fixing in the sky, but also the closing out on the bottom and in the sky, and of course the increase of exposure in one part and the decrease in the exposure in another part. So once again, before any graduated filters, and here is after. But I am not done yet, so let's go to another picture, and this is a sunset photo that I think the graduated filters may even have a more significant and even stronger impact on. And the first thing you will notice here, it's kind of a little bit meshed together, everything looks kind of even, and because of course these clouds and this color is really the main thing I want to concentrate on, I want to have a little bit less exposure, a little bit less attention on the foreground. And by the way, this is also fully edited once again except for the graduated filters, but here I'm just gonna grab a graduated filter and drag it over the foreground like this and go quite far into the minus exposure, and I really want very little attention on the foreground here, and maybe even grab another one over a little bit behind that big one and just go even further down into the minus exposure, and that way you once again get a really nice graduation, but you also get some nice different shades of darkness, from very dark, medium dark to kind of light-ish. But if I show you from before to after, it's a lot less attention on the foreground, and it's pretty much the same as with in the sky, just in reverse. But another thing that I really love the graduated filter for, especially in sunset photos, is to complexify the color. And as you see here, pretty much the entire color is maybe a bit boring, a little bit muffled, it's just very monotone, and I really want to complexify that. So I'm gonna grab a graduated filter and first of all just kind of dragging it like this over the left part and just go into the color temperature and maybe bring that down so I get some more blue tones, some nice differentiation between the warm tones here in the right and kind of the more bluish tones in the left. You could also go here into the colors and change the color of a certain part of your photo, even even more and even more in depth with much more control and much more possibilities. So I'm actually gonna do that here. For example, if you want to add maybe some purple in some part or maybe some more warm tones. But in this case, I think I'm gonna go even further into the blue tones and just choose the hue that I want here. And already we have a very nice differentiation from the very warm right going into the kind of less warm left, with some nice differentiation from blues to purples to magenta and all of that stuff. And already from before to after, it really complexifies everything greatly, but you can go even further with it. Grab another graduated filter, maybe over even a smaller part on the sky, even go further into the blues, let's just say, so you even have a differentiation in the blues from dark blue to light blue. So let me just do that right here. Maybe also go into the color temperature and maybe even grab another graduated filter, but this time drag it over the right and go a little bit more into the warm tones. Also go in here into the color, add some more orange, and you know, the possibilities are almost endless. There is so much different stuff you can do, and it's definitely worth to play around with if you have a sunset or a sunrise or generally a lot of color in the sky. But I think that's pretty much all I'm gonna do here for this photo. Let's just show you the before and the after. A lot more different in terms of color, but also the exposure in the foreground is a lot less distracting. So once again, before and after. And I'm nearing the end, and this is actually the last photo that I want to show you the effects of graduated filters on. And this is pretty much just about depth and clarity. So as you see here, this is a very artistic, kind of dreamy winter picture. And the only thing that I don't like about this is that everything looks so even. From the foreground to the background, you have really no differentiation, no graduation. So the thing you can do with this photo is just to grab a graduated filter, and of course you want the foreground to be sharper, more clarity than the background, because that's what would be natural. So then just grab a graduated filter over the background. Always want to make sure that you have a very soft edge in these kind of adjustments, and go into the minus clarity, and that way you create so much depth. You might even want to grab another one and maybe make a little bit more of a broad adjustment with just a little bit into minus clarity. Grab another one over the very background, and this time go quite far into the minus clarity. And you know, you can always adjust all of these filters. If it's not big enough, you can just drag it and really make sure that it looks good at the end. And also a thing that you can pronounce this even more is to grab a graduated filter in the foreground and go into the plus clarity. So now you really have a nice differentiation from a lot of clarity, very sharp, going into the kind of middle grounds, going into the very almost washed out, very hazy background. And I mean, that is really what creates differentiation, interest, and depth in your picture. So once again, from before to after. And even though I love this technique, it's not really a thing that I use terribly too much, but especially in winter pictures, in very artistic, dreamy, misty kind of photos, it's really a thing that can set your pictures apart and bring them to the next level. And of course, there are so many different ways you can use a graduated filter in your pictures, but these were just the 5 most important things to me that I really like to use them for. So let's go into the first picture actually and give you a list. The number 1 thing that you can use it for is to fix the exposure in the sky or in any large areas. Pretty self-explanatory, but very useful and very impactful. Then second of all, to add additional vignetting to close out the picture, for example in the foreground and in the sky. And I think that's also very important and very valuable. Doesn't work in every single picture, but in quite a lot of the cases it does. And third, to add some different exposure over one part, make one part brighter and make the other part darker, and that way you get a lot of differentiation and a lot of graduation from bright to dark and increase the dynamic of your photo greatly. And then once Lightroom loads, let's go to the fourth one, and that is to increase color in just certain areas. For example, if you have a sunset and you just think the colors are a little bit too monotone, you can just drag a graduated filter over one side, maybe add some color over here or in the temperature slider, and that way you really will complexify everything. And my fifth and last one would be to add depth in your picture by adding minus clarity in the background and by adding plus clarity in the foreground. So a very useful tool as well, but at the end not usable in as many pictures as the previous 4 adjustments. So these were the 5 different things that I use the graduated filters on, and I hope you maybe could take away some technique that you haven't heard of before. And if you did so, then please be sure to subscribe for more Lightroom, landscape, nature and general photography related videos in the future. I hope you have a great day, take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.